Hi, I'm Ben. Welcome back to my channel where you might have noticed that I've been doing a lot of reading and content about the Booker Prize. This is going to be my last video on it for a while though, because it is the one I have been building towards. This is my ranking of the entire long list and my thoughts about what we may see on the shortlist. Although actually that is a slight lie because I won't be ranking the entire long list. Although I have been very lucky to get my hands on a copy of Kiran Desai's Brick of a Novel, thanks to the joint efforts of Jen Campbell, who runs a brilliant channel, and a lovely bookseller who got in touch with me, I haven't finished it, and therefore I haven't finished the long list. I was very tempted to say, like, I failed at this, but actually I think I'm just being a normal human because this is a very dense book. I don't want to rush it because I don't think I'll get as much out of it as I should if I do. Anyway, the shortlist is coming very soon. It will be announced at a live show that is open to the public, but also live streamed, and it's happening in London on Tuesday the 23rd of September. Maybe I will be there. But if you aren't able to make it and you want to watch the live stream, I'll leave a link to that in the description so that you can watch along and see the announcement live. Between now and then though, the literary side of BookTube, Bookstagram and BookTok is teeming with takes about what they think will be on the shortlist, what should be on the shortlist, and what should not be on the shortlist. I'm not one to buck a trend, so in this video I'm going to talk a bit about the themes I noticed in my reading of the long list, then I'll take a look at what readers like you all think by having a look at the Goodreads data, and then I will rank all of the books leading to my personal shortlist, and finally what I predict the judges will go for. That is a lot to cram in, so let's get on with it, beginning with my thinking about the long list as a whole and my experience of reading it. So when the long list was announced back at the end of July, I had already read 3 of the books and I thought they were all shades of excellent. 2 of them were 4-star reads for me and 1 was a 5-star read. And as I started working through the books that I hadn't read yet, I was very impressed by what I was reading. I felt like this was shaping up to be the strongest list in years. But it is funny how the order in which you go through the books really shapes your attitude towards the entire list, because actually some of the later books I read contained some things I was less enamored with, including one that I had high hopes for but turned out to be quite a big disappointment, but not a bad book. And so I think I've settled on feeling like this is a very good list, though perhaps not a world-beatingly great one. My personal average rating this year was just over 3.8, but that is only for 12 books, not all 13. That is just above my average for 2023's list, which was 3.69, but below my average for 2024, which was 3.92. But you know, star ratings are only really a reflection of my enjoyment of a book at the time, and although they have the illusion of being objective, they are quite a subjective measure, and it is only one way to think about the strength of a long list. The tagline for this year's prize is fiction worth talking about, and I think on that front this list is absolutely fantastic. It really excels at bringing to your attention books that benefit from discussion, books worth reading with friends where you can unpick some of the nuances or some of the weirdnesses of these books. Even if you don't like some of them, there's lots to think on and theorise about. So on that front, I think this is a roaring success. But what does everyone else think? Gauging whether a list is resonating or not can be a little bit tricky because most of what I see comes from this small bubble of people that I follow on social media. And to add balance to that, for the last few years, I found it really fun to crunch some of the numbers based on Goodreads data to see what readers more generally are making of these books. Which ones are we loving and which are we not quite jiving with? So first, here are all the ratings of all of the long-listed books as they were not long before filming this video. When you look at Goodreads for yourself, the numbers might be slightly different. As you can see, the current readers' shortlist would include Sea Scraper by Benjamin Wood, The Loneliness of Sonia and Sonia, The Loneliness of Sonia and Sunny by Kiran Desai, Endling by Maria Riva, The Land in Winter by Andrew Miller, Flesh by David Szalay, and Flashlight by Susan Choi. That's how readers are voting with their ratings, but it doesn't necessarily track with how the real shortlist will shake out. When I did this video last year, the eventual winner, Orbital by Samantha Harvey, was in 7th position on the readers' rankings. There are a couple of other really interesting things to note. So there are only 2 books here with average scores above 4, and one of those, the Kiran Desai novel, only has 141 ratings because it hasn't been released released yet. The average rating of books does tend to fall the more widely the book is read, and with it just hanging on by a thread, I expect that will dip below 4 sometime soon. However, on the flip side, the lowest rated book on the Goodreads readers shortlist, which is actually a position shared by Flesh and Flashlight, got to be careful saying those, their score is higher than the lowest rated book on last year's readers shortlist, which at the time was Colin Barrett's Wild Houses, and that had a rating of 3.77. In terms of the number of ratings, the most read book by far is Katie Kitamura's Audition, which has had almost 16,000 ratings. That is 3 times more than the second most read book, which is Flesh, and more than the 9 least most read books combined. The least read book, perhaps unsurprisingly, is the Kiran Desai, which I already mentioned has only 141 ratings. But the lowest book that has actually been published is One Boat by Jonathan Buckley, which is the only other book on the list with fewer than 1,000 ratings. I also think it's really interesting to look at the average rating and the distribution of the ratings to see how that compares to previous years. Here's a kind of scatter plot that shows that. The average this year is 3.69 stars, which is the lowest in a while, but to be honest, I don't think that's a completely reliable barometer of what makes a good list. Like, the best book club books are the divisive ones because they really get people talking, and many of these books are ambitious and do take big swings, so I'm not surprised to see that they're more divisive. The comparison to last year is interesting but maybe unfair because that had like these really widely loved books like James and Hisham Attar's My Friends, and it still amazes me how much of that list was clustered around the 3.6 to 3.7 mark. You can see just visually that this list is a little bit closer to what 2023's looked like. They have the exact same high scoring book and almost the exact same low. The outlier you can see on the 2023 list is Study for Obedience by Sarah Bernstein, which had an average rating of 3.23. And that kind of thing, I suppose, is what I see as pulling the 2025 average down. There are more experimental books like Study for Obedience here that are never going to be universally popular. Okay, that's enough data. Let's talk about themes, because I did spot a lot of thematic consistency on this list, not just in terms of subject matter, but also how these books were written and what they were trying to do. I've got 5 themes that I will run through quickly, and I would love to know if you noticed any of these as well, or if there were any other strong themes that I've missed. Do let me know in the comments. Theme number 1 is family, parenthood, and power imbalances. So many of these books turned out to be about families in one way or another. Not always happy ones, often dysfunctional, but always really fascinating to pick apart. I was especially struck by how often young parenthood came up and how having a baby very early can completely change the course of someone's life, no matter whether they choose to keep the child or not, or whether they even have a choice at all. On top of that, there were, I think, a worrying number of stories that involved relationships between students and teachers, which added to this recurring thread of power imbalances, not just between students and teachers, but also between different family members of different means or from different backgrounds, and how that can shape their lives from the very start or from the middle onwards. Theme number 2 is masculinity, and this is all about the way that men wield power. It cropped up a lot more than I expected, whether it was the stripped down male perspective of Flesh, the similar passivity of Tom in The Rest of Our Lives, or the quieter domestic tensions in Flashlight. I kept coming back to how novels on this list were interrogating what it means to be a man and how that shapes both families but also societies. Theme 3 is belonging, displacement, and diaspora. I think one of the strongest threads across the long list was the question of where people belong. Books like The South and Love Forms dealt very beautifully with displacement, memory, and the meaning of home. And then you've got Universality, which looked more sharply at identity within social and political systems. But I also couldn't help notice that despite the fact that this list very much announces itself as being global, as representing voices from all over the world, in many ways that's true, but you also have to recognise that many of these authors now live in the US, the UK, or Canada, and they are offering an outsider's perspective. It really made me wonder, like, what's the texture of this diversity? Is the global nature of the list real, or is it a little bit of an illusion? There is certainly value in hearing global stories through the eyes of diaspora. That's always really interesting. But are they actually all doing similar things to the places and cultures they are writing about? It's just quite interesting to think about. Theme 4 is metafiction. This is another pattern I noticed about how many writers were breaking the boundaries of narrative. They were playing with form, drawing attention to the act of storytelling itself, and even inserting themselves into the text in some way. Sometimes I really admired this when it felt smart or playful and genuinely added to the book. But look, it's a very hard thing to do, and other times it felt a bit self-conscious or uneven, like the idea was better than the execution. For me, it was a reminder that boldness only really works when it's under control, and that clever tricks on their own aren't enough. And theme number 5 is style and prose. I guess this is kind of connected to the last point, but there's a lot of very stylish or stylized prose on this list. And often, for me, that could make or break a book. When it worked, like Kitamura's cool precision, Szalay's hypnotic minimalism, or Adam's graceful pacing, it carried the whole book. And then when it didn't, as with like Buckley's flatness or Reeva's chaotic unevenness, it really dragged the story down. Style is not just surface level decoration. In these books, I think it really revealed what the authors were shooting for, and I imagine that is what captured the judge's attention. Right then, let's do the bit you've been waiting for, the ranking. I'm going to go through all of these books from number 12 to number 1, where number 1 is the book I thought was best. Obviously, Sonia and Sunny, the 13th book, is not included. Although, based on what I've read so far, I would guess that it's going to end up somewhere in the middle, maybe the bottom half. But you never know, long books are a journey and they can really change your mind along the way. The ones I am including in this ranking, I have reviewed all of them in full already, so I'm going to tell you very briefly why I'm putting that book in the position it's in, and I will link to my full reviews in the description if you want to hear more detail. At number 12 is One Boat by Jonathan Buckley. This is about a woman who goes to a Greek island while she is grieving her father. For me, this was the weakest on the list, perhaps just being edged out by the book that I have at number 11. This one is probably more accomplished in terms of its prose, but its sin is being so boring. I found it boring to the point of frustration. It is so focused on these tiny little observations that I found it very self-indulgent and navel-gazing. There was no sense of drama for me, no hook to pull me in, and nothing to reward the effort of reading it. Although it is very short, it felt much longer because of how boring it was. And even when I sat down to write my review, I realised that I had very little to say because the book gave me not very much to work with. I'm sad to say that it really left me cold. At number 11 is Misinterpretation by Ledia Choga. This is about an Albanian interpreter living in New York who gets herself way too involved in her clients' lives. This had a premise that I was really excited by, like the intersection and blurring of professional and personal relationships and having this layer underneath of like cultural alienation. It sounded really good and it could have made for a powerful story. But in practice, I felt it didn't deliver. The characters' motivations were often confusing or inconsistent. There were plot lines that were just dropped without any resolution. And the whole thing felt pretty disjointed. At times, I could glimpse the novel it might have been, but the execution just never matched the idea. In the end, I came away thinking it was more of a missed opportunity than anything else. Okay, this next one is going to be my most controversial placement. I can just feel it. But in 10th place, I have Endling by Maria Riva. This is about a snail scientist and her colleagues from the romance tour industry that she gets into a bit of a caper with. I really did admire the ambition here. Riva is clearly trying something bold with metafictional playfulness and this like formal experimentation that is quite fun, and it touches these really powerful, really emotive political issues in Ukraine today. And look, there were moments that I thought were genuinely interesting and moving, but overall the execution just fell pretty short for me. The humour of it did not land at all. Shifts in tone or like shifts in perspective felt quite uneven, and the book never came together as a cohesive whole. I really wanted to like it, but by the end, I just felt a bit disappointed because I had such high hopes for it. It's one of those cases where I could respect what the author was trying to do without actually enjoying the reading experience all that much. Okay, from here on out though, all of the books are 4-star reads or more. So my placement becomes a little bit arbitrary and I could easily shift all of these around on a different day. But for now, today, my 9th placed book is The Rest of Our Lives by Benjamin Markovits. This is about a man who has a bunch of overlapping problems in his life with his job, his marriage, and his health all in jeopardy. And he takes this road trip to basically just run away from it all and retread parts of his life. This is a novel I really enjoyed spending time with. It's a nuanced, empathetic family story, one that really pays attention to the complexities of relationships and the way people fail but then forgive one another. I really appreciated the subtlety of it and the way it doesn't force drama, but it lets life unfold on the page, which nicely reflected the passive personality of the protagonist. I can see that for some readers, the characters might feel irredeemably unlikable, and there were moments where I wondered if I was supposed to care about them as much as I did. But in the end, I found it really thoughtful and very rewarding. In 8th place for me is Flesh by David Szalay. This follows decades in the life of a Hungarian boy. He's like a teenager at the start, and we see his ups and downs in status and wealth and worth. This was a very difficult one for me to place because in some ways I admit that I found it frustrating. It's quite stripped back to the point of being austere, with so little ornament on the language or colour to it. But on the other hand, I could not stop reading this. There's a weirdly hypnotizing thing about Szalay's style. The precision of his prose, the rhythm of the sentences, and especially the dialogue. There was just something brilliant about the way the story is pared right back, and you read a lot of meaning underneath what's actually written on the page. It's very impressive in a singular way that's very different to everything else on this list. In 7th place for me is Audition by Katie Kitamura. This is about an actress who meets up with a young man at a restaurant and, well, things happen, and Kitamura bamboozles us in a really good way. I was very impressed with this. I think Kitamura writes with such precision and elegance. Every sentence feels carefully shaped, and her prose has this cool, almost crystalline quality to it. The structure too is very clever and unsettling in a way that made me think a lot. At the same time though, and I guess this is why it's not higher on my list, I did feel a little bit distanced from it. I admired what it was doing. I thought it was brilliantly done, but I didn't connect with it emotionally quite as much as I did with some other books on the list. Still, it's very strong, and I suspect it will stick with me for a long time. Okay, at number 6, and we are into my personal shortlist now, we have The South by Tash Orr. This is a novel of queer adolescent yearning when a family move out to a rural part of Malaysia, down in the south, where they inherit a farm. I found this to be a very moving, quietly powerful novel. Orr writes beautifully and dreamily about displacement and belonging, and I felt really touched by the emotional core of the story. It's not showy or loud, but there is a quiet confidence to the way it unfolds. It jumps around in time and perspective, and it left a strong impression on me. It didn't absolutely sweep me away in the way that my top few books on this list did, but I admired it greatly and felt genuinely moved by the end. It's one of those understated books that lingers more than you'd expect, and I'm very much looking forward to the next book in the series. At number 5 for me is The Land in Winter by Andrew Miller. This is about 4 characters, 2 married couples, during a historically cold winter in Bristol, which happens to be where I live. I think upon immediately finishing this, I might have put it a bit lower, but it has really stuck with me and grown in my estimations the more I've thought about it. It is absorbing and it's atmospheric, and I felt very caught up in the world of the characters. I thought Miller just handled the setting and the tension very well. There were long stretches where I was very impressed by the quality of the writing. I don't think the ending quite worked for me because it was so abrupt, but man, the writing It really is just so good. And it's kind of overcome that problem for me the more time passes since I finished it. There is just a heck of a lot to admire here. The book I've put in 4th place is Universality by Natasha Brown. This is like a newspaper long read about a man who has been bludgeoned with a gold bar, and then the fallout for a bunch of the characters when that article goes viral. I thought this was excellent. It is smart, sharp, it's brave. Brown takes on these big ideas with quite a lot of wit, but also precision, and she manages to balance that intelligence with a certain humour and bite that I really appreciated. It's weirdly like an easy book to read, but a challenging one to get the full effect of. There's a lot of layers to pull back. But for me, that was part of its charm and a big part of its strength. It felt like the kind of novel that is not just well written, but also doing something very necessary and urgent. And I think particularly relevant in modern Britain. I admired this immensely, even though it's not always a comfortable read. Into my top 3 then, and I'm just now realising at how inconsistent I am with my own opinions, because I had given Universality 5 stars, and this next book I actually gave 4 stars. So maybe I should change that. I don't know. But my 3rd placed book is Flashlight by Susan Choi. This is the one that starts with a father and daughter at the beach on an evening walk that goes horribly wrong, and then the ripples backwards and forwards in time connected to that event. This was an excellent family novel. It's very long, and it surprised me with how deeply it moved me. Choi is a master of structure and voice, and the way she captures tensions within a family it's razor sharp, but it is deeply empathetic. What impressed me the most was how she managed to move me, even though many of the characters are, frankly, not likable in the slightest. I think that takes real skill. But by the end, I felt a quiet but powerful sense of admiration. It's a book that doesn't announce its brilliance loudly. It does get deep into the weeds, into the detail of these lives. But for me, it earns every page. There are only 2 books left, and so as soon as I tell you my number 2, you're going to know what my number 1 is. But my second favourite book from this long list is Love Forms by Claire Adam. This is about a woman called Dawn from Trinidad who gave up a baby at 16, and how that hangs over her entire life with this underlying urge to reconnect. This was one of the very first ones I picked up after the Longlist announcement, and I just really loved it. It's a beautifully crafted novel about memory, home, belonging, and it struck me as both intimate but also expansive. The prose is very graceful, the pacing is very controlled, and the emotional weight of the story builds so naturally that by the time I reached the end, I was genuinely moved by the whole thing. I especially admired the ending. I thought it was just very, very well done. It was satisfying without doing too much. This is one of those novels that feels quietly brilliant, and you really want to press it into other people's hands. And so, at last, my number 1, and in this spot, without a doubt, is Sea Scraper by Benjamin Wood. This is about a young man in the northwest of England who earns a living scraping for shrimp, and his life's possibilities seem to open up when this hotshot American movie producer comes knocking at his door. I absolutely adored this book. From the very beginning, I was just completely immersed in its atmosphere. Its voice is very compelling, it draws you in, and it has a great emotional depth. And it does all this while being very, very short. It's like basically a novella. It's rare that a novel manages to feel so vivid and alive, but this one really did. And I found myself lost in Thomas's world. I actually listened to the audiobook of this while reading the physical at the same time, and it really deepened my appreciation for the novel. It was a great reading experience. This was the standout of the list for me, and it's a novel that I loved wholeheartedly. So, just to recap, that means that my personal shortlist this year is Sea Scraper by Benjamin Wood, Love Forms by Claire Adam, Flashlight by Susan Choi, Universality by Natasha Brown, The Land in Winter by Andrew Miller, and The South by Tash Orr. Will that be the official list? I have no idea, but I am going to have a guess at what I think the actual judges' shortlist would be. This is probably going to be completely wrong given my my inability to predict anything correctly lately, but let's give it a go anyway. So I do think we will see Sea Scraper and The Land in Winter on the list. I think Sea Scraper is a fan favourite. The Land in Winter just has writing that you can't ignore, and I do think it will be rewarded for that reason. The other 4 books, though, I think might be slightly different. So I think we'll see Endling on the list. This has resonated with a lot of people. I know I didn't love it, but I think it's one that's quite easy to view as important and could really earn its place on the shortlist for that reason alone. Then I think we'll have Audition by Katie Kitamura. I think if they're going for books worth talking about, this is kind of the ultimate one as far as this list is concerned. I also think Flesh by David Szalay is a strong contender for the shortlist. There's something about this that is just quite captivating. It captures masculinity so well and feels like the sort of stylish thing that would make the shortlist. And then rounding out my shortlist prediction, I think we'll see The Loneliness of Sonia and Sunny, just because I assume that the judges are personally targeting me and will want to make sure I finish reading it. That's not ego, that's paranoia. So that wraps up another year of Booker Longlist reading. Thank you for joining me along for the ride. I had a lot of fun reading this list once again this year. I hope that any books from the list that you've dipped into are ones that have brought you joy as well. And I hope that this video has brought you a small slice of joy too. If you did enjoy it, I would really appreciate you giving it a like, because it really helps the channel out. And if this is your first time here, then why not hit subscribe as well? Do let me know down in the comments which books you have read and loved from the Booker Longlist this year, and what do you think is going to make it onto the shortlist. Let's continue the conversation. But until next time, toodles.